Thank you everyone for joining today. I'm Jeremy Miller, Director of Marketing. Today's speaker is Natalie Stringer, our resident professor. She'll be providing some tips with examples for how to effectively move your course online, as well as provide a brief introduction to the LabArchives platform.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm excited to be speaking today. Let me get everything lined up here. So as I mentioned, I want to make sure I address questions today. I want to make this something that everybody can take home with them and use in their courses. So I'm going to provide some examples and tips on how to move your course online, especially if you're trying to take your laboratory course online. So I'm going to be providing some examples both from my own classroom and from what other instructors have used, and put that into context. So provide some examples from our library of labs, things in LabArchives, and things from my own experience. So I'll give you some practical examples. So just a little background for myself. I was a postdoctoral fellow at the National Institutes of Health, where I actually studied viruses, and I studied virus assembly and how host cells are involved in putting viruses together. So this is actually me doing an education outreach at the Smithsonian. We were talking about viruses, their genetics, and for me, what better way to talk about viruses than to dress up like a virus when you're talking to kids. I was an associate professor at Montgomery College. It's a college in Maryland, just outside of the DC suburbs, where I taught biology, microbiology, and biotech. I'm a big believer in getting students actively involved in the classroom, getting them to build things, really be involved in the process, and make it be fun. Now I am the Director of Content Development and the resident professor here at LabArchives. And while at Montgomery College and another institution that I taught at, a big part of what I did there was teach online and teach blended or hybrid courses in undergraduate, I would say non-majors courses, be it Gen Bio or non-majors virology courses. And I have certifications in online education for 2 different schools. The other part that I really enjoyed when I was at Montgomery College is helping other instructors bring active learning, distance learning into their classroom. So taking my experience and being able to help other instructors do that in their classroom. So I hope I can take some of my past, what I've learned, and help you take that to your classroom today, especially in this switch where we need to take the whole nation, basically the whole world is trying to move their classrooms online in a short period of time. So just trying to take, we're gonna go back and forth between what are my top tips and give you some examples and what these tips and how to concretely use them. And I'll show you in our platform, if these are my tips, what would they look like with an actual lab? So for me, we just start in the big picture view. I think for all good teaching, we're thinking starting with that end goal. When I first started teaching, one of my teaching advisors said, you always have to start with the end in mind. So yes, you might have to have some really exciting ideas about what you want to do in your classroom, but take a step back and think about what's that goal for your student. So begin with the end in mind. So especially now as we're thinking about what do you usually do in your laboratory, let's turn it around and think about what is that goal and how can we then meet that goal in a different way. I'm then going to show you some examples of how to learn by building, a little bit about how to have fun, and then come back to this idea of repetition is really important in a face-to-face class, but it's even more important when we talk about how to do something in a distance learning situation. So I need to tell you a little bit about what LabBuilder is and what our platform is. Essentially what LabBuilder is jump into it. It's a digital library of labs. It's inside of our LabArchives platform. So the idea is that an instructor could be able to pull any piece of information. They could pull from a lab, a protocol. We have multiple different disciplines, but they could pick and choose what they want and customize it for their course. So what you see, you're looking at LabArchives right now. LabArchives works as a series of pages, folders, and subfolders, which you can see over here on the left-hand side. The action happens in the middle. So if you're familiar with your learning management system, when I come to this page, you can attach pictures, text, give assignments. So most of that action would happen for your student here in the middle of the page. If I draw your attention to the top, one of the nice things about working in a digital electronic notebook is that you can search the notebook. So you're not having to go and thumb through pages or look through students' notebooks. You can actually search across the notebook. If you're thinking about searching for content inside of our LabBuilder notebook, I've put in tags for anything that's appropriate for online use. So you could search in here for online, and anything that is that I've tagged for online should pop up for you. I'm going to bring your attention over here to notebooks. So this particular person, so Rosalind Franklin, has 2 notebooks. So she has access to LabBuilder and then My Course Notebook. So that's a notebook that another notebook she has access to. So I'll come back here and I'm going to draw your attention to labs to begin with. I've organized going out, having taught, having worked with other instructors, talking with instructors. Trying to update your course, trying to find things, there's no one standardization of content in one place and another. How are they organized? How do you find it? But everybody's classroom is a little different. If we're thinking about face-to-face instruction, distance instruction, or even if my campus has a different piece of equipment than your campus, but our learning objective is the same, it's nice to have standardization, but we also have to have customization. So when I put this library together, I wanted to find that balance between something that have apples to apples, but you could customize. So labs, protocols, and course packs. I'm going to focus on labs for today, but their labs are always subdivided by discipline in a folder. Within that discipline, you have subfolders that are by you can think of them like courses, but really it's subdisciplines. So if we're thinking about genetics, each one of these folders is a specific lab that is on genetics. And they're all organized that way. So if I come to that first point I was talking about, that you have to think about the end in mind. What do you really want to accomplish with your students? Once that learning objective, even if we have to change how we typically teach something, what do we want to achieve with your students? So I'm going to bring your attention to a general chemistry lab I have down here. So stoichiometry in an antacid lab that I've mapped out. This is true for all labs here in LabBuilder. Always map out the learning objectives. But especially when you're thinking about something online, it can be helpful for the students to really know exactly what they're achieving. But if we're trying to turn something around for something on an online situation, getting the students, it's not always about what they have to physically do per se, but maybe they are the designers of the hypothesis. Maybe they are they designed the experiment, and you could provide the data to them. They interpret the data. This is an example of a lab where the students actually can perform the experiment. So here is the example would be they can use it with household products. So all they need is baking soda and vinegar, or something like an Alka-Seltzer. So these are things that they likely have in their home or they can have easy access to. So this is a type of lab where you're achieving that same goal of the learning objective. The student can still interact with it. They can they can collect that data, process the data. It just happens to be at home. They're still processing it. One of the ideas that an instructor gave to me is that for her distance learning class, is that she has students take selfies of them actually doing the experiment. So it's a way to actually demonstrate that they're doing their work, that they're engaged with it, but it brings in an element of fun as well. Another way to bring the students really achieving, involved in the process, if your goal is to get them to collect data, interact with data. There's something called citizen science. There's a lot of different types of citizen science out there. One of them that I've used in a classroom before is called Budburst. And being spring here in the North America, it's a great time where students can go out, they're collecting data, they're putting this data in a broader picture, data goes worldwide, and that can help them also be involved into understanding where data goes, how to create a hypothesis. And you're using the laboratory notebook to share that data with each other. So one more that I want to point out is something that I'm working on right now is the biochemical unknown. And microbiology is a common lab that a lot of microbiology undergraduate courses are working on. This is typically the time of the semester where faculty would bring that in. It's true in micro, it's also true in a chemistry class where you're given an unknown microbe, chemistry would be given an unknown chemical, and you have to work through a series of experiments to try to figure out what you're doing. I'm writing right now, and it should be done by the end of this week, basically an experiment. Instead of the student actually going through the procedure where they have to inoculate the tube, look at the data, process the data, and figure it out, we're actually, the way this is being written with another instructor is they will be given the picture of the data, they have to interpret the data, then ask the instructor for the next step. So essentially they're doing all of the data processing, the data analysis, everything that they would be doing in a course. They're just not necessarily doing the streaking of the plates. They're not inoculating the tube. So if your goal again is for them to understand the biochemistry behind what they're doing in this tube, if your goal is for them to understand the data interpretation, to synthesize everything, if that's your goal, then just rethink how you design that experiment. And that's what's always worked really well for me when teaching online. So the next part, what has worked really well for me in the classroom, in a distance learning classroom, is learning by building. So getting my students to either to really take ownership in their learning, which is true in a face-to-face classroom, but is really important in that distance classroom because they can become really, really passive. That has always been one of the problems I faced with is you send out emails, you send out alerts, and it feels like they're going into this black hole and nobody responds. I don't know if they're really what they're doing with it. So one way to actually get them, for me to know if they're really involved in that process, is to have them build something. So an example I have is actually here. So this is one of my blended classes for a non-majors virology course. I had them build models of virus. And so this is actually a coronavirus. This is MERS. So this was about 2 or 3 years ago. I'll show you an outline in a minute, but I had my students build models. And this is one of their models. The idea is that you're having them teach the concepts. I'm going through and giving them the background, but I want them to apply that. And I need them to demonstrate to me what they applied, what they did. So I'll bring up, where did that go? Here we go. So this is an example of the project they had to do in this distance hybrid class for non-majors virology. So essentially, I gave them some scaffolding and some structure of, they had to pick the virus they wanted to work. They could work together if they wanted to. And I told them, what is it that, how are you going to build this and what could you make it out of? But also for that model, I gave them some structure of what did you have to show? So they had to show these specific parts of the virus. I needed this specific pieces of the nucleic acid. They needed to have, it didn't matter if it was artistically fancy, but it did have to be accurate from a point. So then the other part of it, not just the model, but also a summary. So I wanted them to demonstrate they understood the structure, but also write up and do that research. So even if I couldn't see them face to face every day, they were demonstrating to me that they understood what I was either giving them in video lectures or asking them to read. So one of the problems that I have found in distance learning is keeping people accountable. Are they checking in again and again and again? And this is true. It doesn't matter if they're freshmen, it doesn't matter if they're graduate students or if they're in their professional life. Having that accountability really helps. So I like to break things down into smaller pieces. Uh, not necessarily micromanaging, but it just gives little benchmarks for everybody. Don't have to go into a lot of nitty-gritty grading. I just like to give those benchmarks for students. So they had to give me a topic, then asking them to actually finalize your topic. They needed to give me a model, a plan for their model, and some references. So you could structure this for a lot of different projects. Another idea for having them build something, if, for example, you aren't able to do a physical laboratory for a topic that you really, really care about, now that you have to go to distance, maybe you have your students teach a topic to each other. So a student picks a particular topic for your course, they become the teachers of the rest of the course. So they videotape themselves, they write a paper, they come up with a presentation. Giving them these smaller guideposts as they build that can be really useful, especially if you have in there some of your expectations or mini rubrics. Can be really, really helpful because everybody is then on the same page, because things can get lost in translation if you're not speaking face to face. So then that brings in this next part. So having fun. I don't, so I'm on camera right now. I never really enjoyed recording myself, necessarily teaching online. There's an element of, it just takes some comfort, but students really like having that fun. If it's at home, this is brand new, they haven't done it before, bringing that creativity in there and bringing down, reducing some of their anxiety here can really help them engage in the process. For many of you, you already know that some students just aren't engaged in education anyway. Trying to bring some levity to the classroom can really help. So the virus is one way to do it, but another way to do it, I'll bring up an example of a lab. General biology. So another way to do it is just find different ways to model things. So this is meiosis. It's a way of looking, modeling chromosomes with gummy worms. So it could be let them decide how they want to do it, but think of fun ways. It could be worms, it could be gummy worms, it could be toothpicks. Don't give that student some ownership to decide how they want to model things, but also make it fun. It doesn't have to just be drawing. So that can, again, that goes back to the beginning where decide what you want them to learn, but then give them different alternatives to how to go about learning that. And you can do that with whatever discipline you're thinking about. So if we're thinking about chemistry, maybe there's a different way to go about teaching a particular topic. Maybe they create a song or something of that nature. So then the last part is repetition. I have found that for me and in my courses, having a pattern, especially online, is essential. Students, if you're creating a structure that is brand new for them, they really need to have a pattern. They need to know when to turn things on, turn things in, what those expectations are going to be. This is brand new to them. Certain students are better and more prepared for online and distance learning than others. So if now that we're going to make this switch, establishing that pattern up front, you're going to have some flexibility, but it will help if you establish it now. So let me show you an example of a syllabus here. So I like to always, so this is just an example. This was a hybrid course. where we met once per week on campus. Everything else was done online. So this is somewhat different than what you're probably experiencing right now, but this is just one way I've gone about it. So they had to come once a week to campus, but they always had weekly interim assignments and then an on-campus discussion, and then everything at the end of the week. They would have kind of a cumulative assignment at the end of the week. So that meant there were benchmarks within a week. Structure, and that helped them create a pattern. And as I showed you before, that big project, there were tiny benchmarks built in within this schedule. What I will recommend, and has been recommended to me time and time again, when I don't do this, it always comes back and means that I get less sleep, is make any sort of pattern fit your schedule. So what do I mean by that? If you want something, if you prefer to work in the morning, for example, so you like to grade in the morning, you like to look at emails in the morning, make assignments due the night before. So tell your students every Sunday night at midnight, something's due. You look at it on Monday morning, and that way that consistency works for you. If you know that something else, your Wednesdays are always busy, don't have things due Tuesday night, but keep that consistency there. It will help you stay on track and on touch with them, and it helps them not ask you quite as many questions about when things are due. The other thing I really like to do, and I've seen our LabArchives instructors do, and the online training people suggest to me, is if we say, for example, go into one of our physical chemistry labs, is if you have an introduction page, maybe give them a preview of your assignments this week will be X, Y, and Z. Then on a pre-lab assignment, you can even reiterate your assignments this week are X, Y, and Z. At the post-lab assignment, have a checklist. Did you submit X, Y, and Z? So it may seem redundant and that you're re-explaining yourself, but it's a really nice way for the student, if they've not read it, if they blew by it, that they really can go back and check again. Okay, I was supposed to do A, I did A. I was supposed to do B, I did B. I had a due date here, I completed it here. So having that, it doesn't have to be super fancy structured or formatted, but really giving them those guideposts and guardrails, what is due and when, will save you a lot of stress in the long run and fielding those emails. I understand that there's a quick kind of changeover from how you've normally taught it to how we're gonna have to teach it and switching over because of the COVID crisis, but just having some those repetition of what your pattern will be can help a lot and will save you a lot of anxiety for you and for your students. So that was a lot of information that I just threw out there. I'm going to take a pause for questions.
If you have any questions for Natalie, you can enter them into the QA section.
Are there or perhaps other?
Do you have virtual labs?
So I have a number of different. So I would say two things. Yes, we have virtual labs, and we have almost anything here in LabArchives can be adapted for virtual education. So I'm going to show you a minute of something that can be adapted, but and I'm going to define virtual in a lot of different ways. So virtual could be something that, so I'll show, virtual could mean they do a simulation, they do tutorial, and then enter their data here. Virtual to me means the example I was giving about a biochemical unknown for micro, where they're analyzing the data and doing it at home. Maybe virtual can mean the stoichiometry lab with baking soda. So for us, that's what we have here. because you can customize anything we have in LabBuilder, anything could be adapted so it could be done at home. So maybe if you provide them the data, maybe you find a tutorial that spins it around. So absolutely, we do, but it some of it might have to be customized. So then when you have students modeling at home, how do you ensure the students are doing the modeling? So yes, absolutely. I have them take photos. I have them, I always like to have students answer lots of open-ended questions to make sure that they are the ones having to synthesize and answer, that they're really digging into what it means. Um, if I'm not sure that they're really the ones doing the work, um, then I start probing and asking them questions individually. A lot of the modeling parts of things, I start building the next step of say lesson 1 or assignment 1. Assignment 2 might build upon that. So what I didn't show you with the virus modeling is their final exam was built around all those models. So essentially, they had to understand virus structure. They had to understand what was really going on to be able to do well in the end. So that's where for me, I put the ownership on them and learning and digging in. And if students will always want to take the shortest road, and in this situation, it's only going to shoot them in the foot. So taking the pictures, asking them to follow up, putting in those benchmarks will put those guardrails in there as best you can. I hope that answers that question. So can I show a typical chemistry lab? Ideally something at the college level, not high school level. So let me show you. So we have lots of so there's a number of chemistry labs in here that were written by instructors were written by LabArchives instructors. They were shared with us that teach at a college that are at a first year, second year college level. Some of these would have to be adopted to fit for a online setting. So a good example might be, where was the modeling one? Here's a good one. So this is something that could be done at home. This might be too far back in the semester, but if they have a modeling kit, they could do it, they could draw. There's also virtual modeling tools out there. But this is an example where if the student's taking the picture, if they have to put the data in here, the ownership's on them to do the work as well. So that's one example that came from, not from me, but from a college professor. What I did skip over and didn't tell, I can go back to answer that level question, is here. I've tried to outline high school versus undergraduate lower division, and all of our labs in that detail section so that somebody could search in the notebook section. And then again, you can always edit, so you can customize it to be either up, move it up or move it down. I'm going to take one more question. So we'll answer your questions. I'm going to take one more. So the software is free for students and instructors if it's a new course, and it's through July 31st. So we are offering it new for anybody that needs to get on board quickly, and it is fairly easy to get started. We're offering a lot of technical, all of our support. I'm going to slow down there. We're offering additional support training webinars for anybody who's interested to help you get switched over quickly. So I'm going to jump to the how do you actually get started doing this? Like, how would we move a piece of content over and customize it? Since that sounds like that's sort of the next step of questions. You know, how would I go from finding something that I'm interested in? So we found that it something that would work, something I might want to take and then customize. How would I actually move that over and build a course off of that? So I'm gonna pick, just gonna come back to general chemistry and pick a lab. So this is another lab that could be done at home. So as students would only need, basically these are all things they could find in their house. To be able to take a piece of content from LabBuilder, you need to right click on a folder. It could be a whole folder, a page, whatever you're interested in. If you right click, a menu opens up and you can copy it to another notebook. So Rosalind Franklin only has one other notebook. That's her only option. So I'm gonna start the copy, and that asks me where I wanna move it, and we can move it over to the other notebook. As soon as that is done, I can come over to my other notebook, and we'll see that that same lab is now shown up in the other notebook. I'm going to come down here to the pre-lab. Let's say you don't like my questions. You thought that they were too low, too high. You want to add more. Maybe because it's remote, you want to add in a short video and then ask a student a question based on the video. And that can be a really, especially in a distance situation, you want to know that they actually listen to your video. Because it's distance, giving students multiple different types of media, text, video, and pictures is a great idea. Our students, especially, not just our students, all of us prefer media, it seems like, in audio or video anymore. It can, one way to adapt what we have here is to make short little videos, embed those into the LabArchives notebook, and then ask questions that the student really can only get the answer from the video. So again, that creates some ownership there of the student. I would say, just from some gray hairs that are hiding back here, the first go around, don't fuss too much about having the world's perfect video. And also, don't try to recreate the wheel too much. If there's a perfect video out there by somebody else, be it TED Ed, Khan Academy, something, by all means use theirs. If there's something good out there, use it. So if you want to edit something, hover over the text box. There's a little pencil, and you can delete, add, edit to your heart's desire. So this is a good point to say, a good time to say that in this platform, you can use our content, you can use your content, or you can use a mishmash. So there's nothing where you have to use just one or the other. We brought this together. We wanted to make sure that instructors could have a building point, or if they wanted to try some of ours, they could do that. So don't feel like you're restricted to just LabArchives content or just yours. You can bring it together. The other part I want to bring in here is you can attach pictures. So an easy way to attach pictures, especially for students, they're really the ones who are they love being able to attach their photos. You can attach audio, but it's fairly easy for them to come down to the bottom and attach a file. So be it a picture, be it a PDF, those are fairly easy to attach right to the notebook. You can always see the time of when something is attached. You can see, if we go to revisions, we can see what's occurred. So this is another way to check up on your students. If you can't see them face to face, you can't check up on them and see how they're doing. It's a nice way to keep tabs and say, okay, all my emails are going in this black hole. How are they doing? nobody's turning anything in, you can go take a peek in their notebooks and say, oh, okay, so they were logging in, they were making changes. And it's a nice way to keep tabs on what students are doing. So that's how, just in a very, very high level, how you as the instructor and how the student would work in the notebook. So what's that student-instructor relationship when we start creating a class? So what you're looking at right now is just LabArchives notebook. Basically, the way the instructor works together and the student works together is basically the same way. I like to think of the student-instructor relationship. I'm gonna come here, like a pyramid. The instructor creates a notebook. From that, they create a course based on a notebook and share that out with their students. So you as the instructor are at the top of the pyramid. Whatever you create and share out to your students, at that instant that you share it out, every student has the same exact notebook. They all look the same until student A starts adding in their answers and their data. Student B has different data. Student C has different data. Because you're at the top, you can always send new information out to students. You can always log in and see students' specific notebooks. You can edit their specific notebooks. And so you know exactly what's going on in your whole course. So I'm going to come back to the notebook. You'll notice up here we have this icon that supposed to look like a teacher and a chalkboard. This is what's called our course manager. So if I open that up, it opens up in a new page. And essentially, you as the instructor, after you create a notebook, what we were just looking at, you would be able to create a course, which here is my first course. You can give it any title that you want, but it's basing the student notebooks off of whatever you create a course based off of any student notebook or any notebook you want. So the student is getting a reflection of what you see. You can create sections, you can add TAs if that's appropriate, and then you add a student a couple of different ways. So I added Mr. Watson individually, so I could do that email by email, or you can send a link. And this is usually the easiest way and what I see most often. So you can just copy that URL, put it into an email, maybe you put it in your learning management system, send that off to them. And so the student clicks on the link, it asks them to create an account, and they now have access to their notebook. I'm not going to get into how we create assignments, how that gradebook works. I want to spend most of the time here focusing on how we adapt, how to really work online. But we do offer our weekly, so we are now offering on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at noon Eastern time. Our course, basically our support team gives an exhaustive training on how do you work in the notebook, how do you set up a course, how do you grade, how do students set up assignments. So they go through step by step, how does the platform work. We also do on-demand demos, so they can help you walk through all of that. I'm always happy to answer those questions as well. But honestly, it really is just, you create that structure, that shell of your course, share it to the student, and they see the reflection of what you're doing. So that's really what I have for today. I'm happy that I was able to share what my experience, and I'm gonna stick around and answer more questions. I'll leave my contact information up here. Best of luck to everybody who's transitioning. I know this is a chaotic time, but I'm gonna throw more questions at me. I wanna be able I wanna be able to help where I can. So I see, so this would be my first experience with online teaching, and want to interact with students. So do I interact with students online, or do I record, or both? So I'm going to take that step by step, and I'm actually going to go in reverse with that question. I like to keep my recordings less than 10 minutes. So if it's just a recording that I post and it's not interactive, keep them less than 10 minutes if you can. There's, depending on what your school offers, if they have editing videos, there's Panopto, there's all sorts of different software out there. So you can go super technical to quick and dirty, but regardless, I like to keep my presentations to students less than 10 minutes. So that might mean that you have lots of short little nuggets of information. So maybe just chunk, you know, I'm going to talk about this topic for 10 minutes. Then you have another presentation. If I want to have something that it's a back and forth conversation, I might, you know, I create a situation where maybe I start the conversation and then they have to talk back to me. So maybe that is, you know, I propose an open-ended question where it's verbal and they have to maybe record themselves and post back somehow. I'm not a huge fan of discussion boards because many students, especially the shy students, don't like having their answers like in the public, right? So just in a face-to-face situation, you're always going to have the really talkative student and the really quiet student. So if I am going to do, you know, where we're discussing back and forth, I sometimes like to have a private discussion with students, so where they can talk to me, or you know, maybe a small group discussion, and then the bigger class discussion. So thinking, you know, for you as the instructor, think about ways where students can brainstorm or talk or interact, where there's some private space to do that and some public space to do that. Because I really find that sometimes students just stop interacting, not because they don't care, they don't want to ask questions, they're just afraid to put their answer on paper, right? They just don't want to do that. So that can be part of it. So make a mix of it. Try to work, you know, play around with that. So then another question about for modeling. So do I have labs with photos or data or results that they need to analyze? So for some things, we are working on that. I know of instructors that are trying to do that right now. So an example of that is an instructor at the University of California, Irvine. She is in her lab this week doing exactly that. She's trying to record her TAs doing the experiments that they would have normally done face-to-face. They're collecting the data. They're going to give the data to the students to analyze. We have some of that. We're working on getting more of that. I don't have a lot of that, but we're trying to get more and more as we go. There is a lot of that out there online that where you could take what we have and start adapting it to that. So it's growing, and we're trying to get more there. But that's actually where I think this can be a nice way for where you can flip some of your current instruction around, where maybe you ask students to draw out the data, predict the data. You know, if a titration was supposed, you know, you're teaching titration, draw me what the curve should have been, what is supposed to happen. So it may not be perfect, but you're still achieving that goal. Are any of the labs, the other, yes, everything that's on LabArchives, LabBuilder is for anybody to use. All that we ask is that you provide attribution. So I made this, I created this so that it was there to share. I firmly believe that instructors, we work together for the greater good of our students, but I also want to make sure that instructors are sharing good things with each other. So if it's on there, share. And if you want to share with us the awesome things you've done, I would love to be able to do that as well. You'll have an acknowledgement, and we always share back with instructors where their things are used. So absolutely.
And a question someone asked earlier was, is our platform integrated with Blackboard? Not only is it integrated with Blackboard, but also is integrated with Canvas and Moodle.
Yes, so we have 3 integrations. Canvas, Blackboard, and Moodle. And so another one came up with cost. So typically, we are offering it free for all courses, all new courses until July 31st. Our typical cost is $20 per student per semester per course. There's other pricing structure, but that's the typical pricing. And that would include access to LabBuilder for the instructor to pull anything they want. Actually, something I skipped over, and I apologize. I should have pointed this out. We will have OpenStax textbooks all moved into this LabBuilder notebook by the end of the week. So we already are a OpenStax partner. We already have their textbooks in our platform. I'm going to make sure they're all moved over here by the end of the week so that you can easily pick and choose what parts of that textbook you might want to complement your course. And so again, you would have access to all of that in that fee after, say, July 31st. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you taking 50 minutes out of your time, especially in a chaotic week like this. Best of luck to everybody making this huge turn in a short period of time. Please let me or Jeremy know if you have any questions, and good luck and best of luck to your students as well. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Have a great day.